Good evening and welcome to Horror Time. This is another episode of Scary Stories to fall asleep to. Before we get into tonight's episode, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. And now, without further ado, tonight's story. Why I Don't Play with Ouija Boards Anymore by number 9832 from Reddit/True Scary Stories. Here are two stories. The first is super creepy, and the second is more sad, explaining why I no longer participate in these kinds of activities. I want to preface this by saying that I grew up seeing ghosts, so the topic of spirits wasn't new to me. However, I was so scared by them that around the age of 7 or 8, when our energetic systems start to become more individualized, I trained my brain to stop seeing them. I never talked about it with friends, because my family didn't believe me, so I assumed they wouldn't either. The first story takes us back to the 2000s. I was a little girl celebrating my friend's birthday. She always had a Halloween party since her birthday fell around that time. She often mentioned that her basement felt strange, and she didn't like being down there alone. That year, since a group of about 10-year-old girls isn't exactly bedroom material, her mom and grandma set us up in the basement. We played those weird games like light as a feather, stiff as a board. Fun fact, I was the only one we successfully levitated. I remember opening my eyes and nearly touching the ceiling. It was spooky. As some of us started to get tired, we brought out the Ouija board. A few of our friends were too scared to participate. We asked innocent questions, like who the birthday girl would marry, and how old we'd be when we had kids. Typical kid stuff. I asked a question about myself, and it replied with dead, which freaked some of the girls out even more. Then, one of the girls screamed, saying she saw something behind me in the mirror. That was enough for us to stop. Later that night, 3 of us, including me and the birthday girl, couldn't sleep. We were curious if the board was real or not, so we decided to try it one more time while everyone else was asleep. We were close to 3 a.m. What we heard is called the witching hour. Remember, we were about 10 or 11 years old, clueless, and had no idea what we were doing or who we were talking to. We asked the board if it could do something for us. We requested that at 3:15 a.m., the girl who saw something in the mirror would wake up and say something specific. I don't remember exactly what we asked her to say, just that it involved looking into the mirror. After asking, we said goodbye to the board and put it away. We were skeptical about whether our request would happen, but then 3:15 a.m. hit. The basement had a big grandfather clock that no longer chimed but still functioned. Just as the time changed to 3:15 a.m., it happened. The girl shot straight up from her blankets, looked at the mirror with her eyes closed, whispered what we had asked her to say, and then fell back onto her pillow as if nothing had happened. The 3 of us just stared at each other, frozen. None of the other girls stirred or even moved. We were so freaked out that we didn't sleep until the sun came up, which in October in the Midwest is pretty late. We got maybe 3 hours of sleep that night. This was my first ever Ouija board experience, and it changed how I viewed spirits forever. I still think about it and feel guilty that I essentially asked for one of my friends to be possessed. Needless to say, don't ever do that. The second story takes place nearly a decade after the first. I was a senior in high school, and one of my cheer teammates invited the whole team over to celebrate her birthday. I didn't know it, but she had a Ouija board. When she brought it out, I immediately said it wasn't a good idea. Her grandmother had just passed away, and she was really torn up about it. I was adamant that we didn't know if we'd be talking to her grandma or not, but she promised she'd only try it twice and then put it away. By this time, I knew a lot more than I did during my first experience. I told her she must say goodbye each time the girls rotated and had them put salt around the board to keep whatever they were talking to inside the board so no one would or could get possessed. They tried it at least 4 times with different girls each time, but the planchette didn't move once. They all laughed at how scared I had been earlier, calling the board stupid and saying it doesn't actually work. Annoyed, I said, "You know what? I'll do it," and I'll prove to everyone here that these boards are real. It was me, the birthday girl, who was a class below me, and 2 other girls from my class who had only joined the team that year. We placed our fingers on the planchette and did the 3 circles to begin. I asked who we were talking to, and the planchette moved for the first time that night. The 2 girls in my class were huge skeptics. They accused me of moving it, but the information that came out was something I never knew until they connected the dots for me. The board first went to the letter J, then to the letter R. We were all confused because JR wasn't a name or someone we knew, or so we thought. We asked why they were here, and the board spelled friend. We asked again who it was, and the board spelled JR. We then asked what the J stood for, and the board spelled out JONAT, and one of the girls from my class screamed, "No way." We all looked at her in confusion. She asked, "Is this Jonathan Ramon?" The planchette immediately moved to yes. The 2 girls went silent, and we just waited. The birthday girl asked who JR was, and the girls started to explain. JR was a guy in the class above me. I knew of him but didn't know him personally. I had cheered all 4 years of high school, so I knew him from the football team, but that was about it. He had passed away during our sophomore year, his junior year, from carbon monoxide poisoning. He didn't want to wake his parents after coming home from a party in the middle of winter, so he slept in his car with the engine running in the garage. His parents found him the next morning. I remember how devastated his class was. His friends didn't come to school for at least 2 weeks out of grief, and we had a big celebration on the football field in the spring. Back to the Ouija board, the 2 girls in my class were panicked. They looked at me weirdly, and I said, "Well, it must be him coming through." They insisted it was impossible because the board doesn't work, and accused me of making it all up and moving the planchette. They called me horrible for impersonating JR, but I wasn't. I said, "Let's keep going and see what else comes up." I knew they were friends of his and could validate the information that came through. They reluctantly agreed and anxiously asked a few more questions. They asked what his football number was. The planchette moved to 2 numbers, and the girls were in shock. I looked at them questioningly because I had no idea what his number was. Then they asked what color his car was. The board answered red, which was true. I at least remembered that the picture they used for his celebration showed him and his red car because he loved that car. They then asked who his best friend was, and I definitely had no idea who that would be. The board spelled out his best friend's name. The guy was the only person in our school with that first name, but we asked for the last name just to see if it would spell it correctly, and it did. The girls didn't even say goodbye. They flung the board at me. They called me a liar, saying I made all of this up. They were sobbing and screaming at me, making me incredibly uncomfortable. I was nothing but the tuner, the instrument that opened the veil for them, and they thought I was an awful person. The whole team fell silent, and I just left because of how uncomfortable I felt. Even though I had been captain of our team and had cheered with most of those girls for at least 3 years, the majority didn't talk to me for at least 2 weeks, even at practice. Many thought I was either crazy or disgusting. Only a few understood that I wouldn't have known that information based on who I was, friends with at school, and who I actually hung out with. JR and I had never truly crossed paths for conversation until that night. If it was actually him, that is. I think it was, but I do know that spirits can pretend to be someone and read our thoughts and memories. I don't use Ouija boards anymore because you never know who you're going to get or who you're going to upset, even if it does work. Now, I am a practicing energy reader and medium. All of these experiences have taught me how to connect more safely with the other side. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Horror Time. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more videos. Have a great evening, stay safe, and good night.